Welcome to the final voting for the Maven Slopes Challenge. Before I get started, I'd like to officially welcome Stacy as a judge, who just so happens to be the only challenge winner among us. So welcome, Stacy.
Thanks, Enrique. It's like a full circle moment. Stacey. It was a year ago that I was in the challenge, so it's really exciting to be here.
That's awesome. All right. So after our portfolio showdown the last time around, this actually marks an exciting return to the traditional model of us providing a data set and a prompt for participants to work on, but with the added benefit that we're actually being able to showcase the projects on our site now and as part of each individual's project portfolio. And what that's done is allow us to evolve these challenges so we're not just evaluating a single static image, but a complete project with a description, embedded media, and additional information. So to take full advantage of this, the task for this challenge was to use data on close to 500 ski resorts around the world and then build a dashboard to help skiers find their ideal destination. So each entry was then uploaded as a project to the Maven Showcase, where we evaluated them based on their insights, creativity, design, visualizations, and for the first time, interactivity as well. Now, we've already narrowed the full list of entries down to 6 finalists. But before we jump into each one, I'd actually like to call out a few honorable mentions. Now, Neil Bagchi had this wonderful dashboard that you can see here that actually included additional information on the number of physicians per 1,000 people in the region and the risk of incurring an out-of-pocket health expenditure if you didn't plan ahead and get health insurance, which was pretty creative. Now, Leah Warner-Tedaldi actually had this really playful dashboard here that kind of included some Tableau animations. You'll see that we've got this little guy here kind of going through the slopes along with us as we start selecting our preferences, which eventually leads to recommending 4 kind of curated ski resorts based on those preferences. The only thing that was a little bit lacking in this one was adding a bit more description and context behind the project in this section here, but the dashboard itself was phenomenal. And the same kind of story applies to Laura Poole here, another one of our honorable mentions, who had this really cool kind of almost website looking dashboard here. You'll see we can filter resorts, we can visualize them on a map, but similar story to Leia, not a lot of description behind the project. Now, for Gabriel, he actually had what I think was the strongest visualization of showing the highest and lowest point for the selected resort, and also in the context of all the mountain ranges in the entire data set, because the top of this peak was actually fixed at the highest height for any mountain peak in the data set, which was really clever. And then finally, Manan Intoya had probably one of my favorite visualizations, first showing when you can ski where, so you can see the calendar here, which very cleverly starts in November, which is the beginning of ski season in North America. You see the ski season in Europe, Asia, South America, and Oceania. So those are our honorable mentions for the Maven Slopes Challenge. But now let's actually dig in to the 6 finalists. So, Chris, why don't you kick us off?
All right. So I have the honor and the privilege to talk through Joe's report here. This was a fan favorite on LinkedIn. It's very easy to see why. He just totally crushed it, went above and beyond, and produced really an amazing product at the end of the day as part of his submission. First thing I always do when I'm looking at a project is jump down to the description, which is why that's so important. This is where I'm going to get the context behind what question he was trying to solve, how he approached it, any nuances that he discovered in the data. And I think he provided one of the best examples of a project description that I've seen. I love that he talks about the first step in his thought process, thinking about who is the end user consuming the dashboard. So we know exactly the question he's trying to answer. He's thinking about who's the end user, and then he's walking through that possible user journey, right? Thinking like a user experience designer here. He actually walks through an entire hypothetical case study to help him wrap his head around how he's going to approach building the project. And then I really like this comment in bold. The third and last step was to actually build the tool or the dashboard. We see so many people who jump straight into building without thinking about those preliminary questions. So I really love that he made it just really clear how he's framing his thoughts and his approach. Now he gets into some Power BI details here. I'm not going to read through all of these, but what jumped out at me is that Stefano is basically playing the role of analyst, web developer, data engineer, and designer all in one in the context of this project, which is extremely impressive. He does a lot of really clever data modeling and DAX calculations. He even uses live APIs to calculate exchange rates for currency. He did some really clever latitude, longitude grouping with Power Query. He even integrated HTML for some really cool custom tooltips. And then at the end, he actually allows you to link out to the booking.com website, which is a very cool custom integration as well. Plus, he custom built the background and the icons. So just really impressive show of work from Stefano here. And then it goes into kind of some details about the data set as well. So without even a report or digging in, I'm already very impressed by his work. And if I were a potential employer or hiring manager, that would really help me understand just how talented he is as an analyst. So now jumping into the report itself, you can see we've got the search option here. There's a section on snow coverage and resort availability, which is really cool. I can show you some of these custom tooltips here, which I think are HTML driven, very clever. And then he's got the underlying data and accreditations, which really just talks about some of the specifics of the data set, which I think is really smart to include. I'm going to do a quick search here. I'm actually going to go skiing later this month, so let's see if it actually works well. I'm going to go next weekend. So we'll say March 24th through the 26th, press search, and we get this full list of 58 different resorts in the US that are open during this time period. That's pretty great in itself. You can kind of view details here as well. And then you can drill down with additional filters. So say I only want to spend 100 USD, you can change the currency filter here. And I want to place with some night skiing too. So I'll use that filter. And that's going to give me 20 different results here. And I'm actually going to go ski at Sunday River next week. So I can view some of the details here, just very user-friendly. It feels like I'm using a website, not a Power BI report, which I think speaks to his ability to design and build, back end for this that just makes it a really smooth and impressive user experience. So overall, I encourage everyone to poke around, take a look at this, play with it. Really impressive work and a great creative submission, Stefano. So very well done.
It's my pleasure to talk through for Nikita's submission. And I really like this one because I think it highlights some of the key principles that we talk about in advanced dashboard design. So one of the first things that I want to point out is that Nikita's done an effective job here of using an F pattern layout. So by making this choice to have the filters right along the left edge, as a user, you're immediately drawn in to begin interacting with the board. And then there's this immediate payoff because of the choice at the bottom to have the resorts found update. You know that as you're moving through your selection criteria, you're actually narrowing down the search. So that's a good choice here from a user experience. One of the things I was initially going to mention here as an ad that could really help the user experience was for the addition of a clear all button. But I actually found it. I realized that it's over here beside the resorts found text, but I think I initially missed it because of the contrast between the white filter button here and the background image. So that's something that we might want to keep in mind. In particular, I think when we're using an image in the background where color changes and the value of the lightness or the darkness changes, it can make some of those things a little bit more difficult to see or find, but it is there. Just would be great if it popped out a little bit more for me as a user. So then that F pattern really pays off again, up along at the top here where the user is presented with this great map and a table that's going to help you narrow down your selection. And I wanted to point out this really cool feature that was added where snowflake images were used as a visual indicator, ranking relative price rating. This is a really slick and kind of engaging way to present this information. And Nikita added the code that was done in DAX down here in the additional images. So a great way to kind of highlight the work that went into developing the back end there. With that strong visual indicator, I had kind of wondered if maybe you could eliminate the column right beside it, which also gave the price in dollars, and use that space on the table to give you one of the other categories in the database that the user might be looking for, like total slopes or lift capacity. And then you could use that as a filter as well. But I was really happy to see that when you click into one of those resorts, that information is available in the pop-up that happens. So it's there. It just might have been good in the table to be able to filter by those criteria. And then finally, I wanted to highlight a choice that Nikita had made to supplement the data that was given in the challenge with information down here in the bottom left around the day length. And I think that's something unique from the submissions. And for me, someone who lives in a more northern latitude, this makes total sense because as the days get shorter, things like whether night skiing is available or not might be a useful differentiator for someone who's looking to choose a resort. So overall, a really great job, Nikita, strong submission. And I was really glad that I got to do a talk through of it.
All right. So up next is Richard Melling's entry, his personalized pist picker. And to be honest, this is my personal entry from this challenge. And I think it's just because of the simplicity of it. Now, don't get me wrong. He actually does have a lot of very complex calculations behind the hood. And he actually goes through and explains those in his description of the project down here. But he's actually using those complex calculations and combining those with a really easy to use front end that really provides a very intuitive experience and eventually takes care of most of the work for you, to be honest. So at the end, you left feeling like you didn't have to spend a lot of time and yet are making a very informed decision on where you want to ski based on your preferences. And honestly, at just a couple minutes at most. And I'll show you kind of how I would go about picking a resort using this dashboard in a second. What I like here is that the filters, which are in these drawers here, are optional and kind of very creative, especially in the way it kind of frames the questions for each of the filters. And especially in the preferences here, in which you're kind of using this ranking by price, difficulty, variety, height, and traveling. And he had to do some creative calculations behind the back in combining, the different difficulties of the slopes and the kind of share between them. And this one, the variety and, how many different options they had. So very clever use of filters. But what I love the most is the fact that it uses those to kind of distill down the 500 resorts total to only the 3 most relevant to you based on those filters. Now, to be fair, a lot of people actually did do that. They didn't just filter to the remaining resorts. They did kind of narrow that down further to just 3 or 4. But in my opinion, this was the best kind of execution of doing that. I think it uses a combination of the geographic, the snow, the season, which you can see highlighted in blue here, really, really well, along with just, providing more details for each of those 3 kind of narrowed down results. Now, if anything, I maybe would have liked a little bit more data viz to be leveraged, especially in these cards here. Something like, bar charts for the slopes to show kind of a more intuitive visual comparison between the kilometers of each one. But other than that, I think this is really, really good. So, for example, say that I wanted to plan a trip to the US to go skiing next year. Just select North America, US. Don't really have any preferences here, but if I go here, let's say somewhere right down the middle with price and difficulty, I'm not that great at skiing, to be fair, but I'd like to have, a nice variety of runs. I'd like it if it was like nice high mountain, and for traveling, I'll just go 5. To be fair, this is based off of if you were based in Heathrow Airport in London, which I'm not. I'm going to select the furthest away because I'm very far away from that. So if I go back, you'll see that I get these 3 options, 2 in Colorado and 1 in this state in Oregon. And just looking at these, if I wanted to go in February, it's very clear that I'd either go to Snowmass or Crested Butte. You'll see that they have the most snow coverage in February. Wolf Creek doesn't really. So for me, just looking at these, beginner slopes, 14 kilometers, 27 here, I think I'm going to go skiing in Crested Butte. So again, very few clicks, but you're kind of left feeling like you've made this really great choice by using this tool. And the final thing that I'll say that I really liked a lot, and especially since I brought up the whole Heathrow thing, is that in the beginning of his description, Richard does mention that there are, possible future developments and improvements that could be made, specifically, in talking about maybe having the user offer a different choice of start location when calculating the distance. But overall, I think his vision was accomplished. It was done really well. And I love the fact that he even mentioned, possible iterations that could help improve that further. So gold standard startup portfolio in my book. Great work, Richard.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome, Enrique. So I get the pleasure of talking about Gerard Duggan's report today. And again, we've got another very typical entry from Gerard here. And by typical, I mean, it's well thought out, thorough. He does a great job explaining his process and providing a lot of technical detail behind the actual report. So one of the things that I love to do is actually start off by digging into what Gerard, his process and really kind of understanding that. So again, here we saw this with some other projects, but again, he's kind of setting that stage where it's the challenge was to build a one-page dashboard to help skiers find their ideal destination. So he's kind of clearly starting off with that as his scope, and then starting to talk about all right, there's some things that I need to kind of understand and explore here before I can actually go through and build my dashboard. So again, I love that approach. It's a great kind of analytics workflow and starting off with those questions and building out that data model and everything before you jump into things. And again, he does a great job here of tackling some of the issues and hurdles that he worked through. And again, very clearly organized here, where he's talking about some of the groupings and some of the challenges and decision-making that he had to go through here, where, how do you create groupings based on price or ski level ability for slopes or, length of slopes or the resort size, stuff like that. So great insight into some of the decision-making there that factored into how he built his data model. From there, I really like this kind of the date alignment piece here, going from seasons to actual month, right? So again, from a user experience standpoint, humans or people tend to think okay, I want to go skiing in February instead of I want to go skiing in the Northern Hemisphere winter or something like that between these months. So this is a great approach to go through and indicate which months were for which season by the individual resort, and then joining that with the calendar table to be able to come up with those kind of those distinct values that allows people to pick a destination by month. So great stuff there. This snow coordinates piece here, again, one of the things that I really loved about this wasn't necessarily the technical aspect behind it, right? Where he's going through and mapping resort and snow coordinates together. But really what this illustrates to me is this is a real analyst workflow where, he likes to work in Power BI frequently for most of his reports. But here he's like, hey, I jumped into Excel to solve this. Right. And there's a lot of times where, myself, other analysts will use multiple tools in a project, even though, we heavily rely on Python or heavily rely on Excel or Tableau, we'll use other tools to help aid in that analysis. And this is just a fantastic example of a way where you can use a tool like Excel to help aid in the ETL process, for Power BI if you're more comfortable there, or it's just easier to solve something in a tool like Excel sometimes. So I love that he's calling out, what he's doing here, but I really like what this illustrates, and that's that use of multiple tools within a project. Digging into some of the report ranking stuff here and some of his custom M functions. Again, this is pretty detailed technical stuff here. And again, it does a really great job of first talking about the why and then kind of jumping into, exactly what he's doing here. One of the pieces that I really liked about the ranking is that he actually adds a little bit more of an allocation towards the snow coverage of a resort, right? So depending on why you're using this tool, let's say you're trying to plan a trip, maybe like, Chris was talking through earlier, he's going to be skiing next weekend and he wants to find the closest resort to him with the most amount of snow. Adding a higher ranking to snow coverage or snow quality or something like that, I think is a very real world, kind of application of applying a higher weight to that attribute within the data set. So I really like that he's calling that out here and talking about that. He's got some other technical detail stuff here with, the challenges behind creating nth elements with DAX. It's very, very challenging stuff here. He references some articles from the guys over at SQL BI. So great reading there if you're interested in the kind of super technical stuff. But and then he's like, okay, now I'm going to bring this all together. I've got everything structured the way I want it to. So we'll jump back up to his report here. And one of the things that I immediately like about the report is that I like that there are only a handful of options that I can choose from, right? I'm not overwhelmed by decision making, right? So I'm going to say, hey, I want to go in February. I'd like to go to a ski resort in North America. I don't really care if it's Canada or the United States, right? We can select all here. Let's say varied ski level. And then we'll say pass price and resort size. We'll select all there. And if I click, let's go, I land on this very kind of clean dashboard with 3 cards that, we're talking about, the first, second, and third choices based on my selection here. And again, like it's very clean, very clear. We kind of get the price, the range of the slopes, the runs, the slope type, by whether they're easy, intermediate, or difficult, the type of facilities or amenities that they offer at each of these resorts. So it's very clean and well laid out here. 2 quick things if I'm kind of being nitpicky here. One, I think that there's an opportunity to add in a little bit more interactivity. I think some of the other submissions did a really good job of adding kind of interactivity after a selection or a submission was made. So, we can kind of hover and look around here, but, we're not really updating too much here. One other thing, and this is not a knock on Gerard or anything, but one of the things that's interesting about this is and this requires deep or knowledge of some of these ski resorts, but the Yellowstone Club isn't actually open to the public. So I couldn't actually go there as a skier. It's a private ski club in Montana that, again, you either need to be a member to or invited by a member there. So there's some little nuances like that are actually kind of cool, where there's opportunity for adding in supplemental data and resources and stuff like that. So again, not a knock on Gerard at all, but it's one of those interesting things that's part of the data set. The last thing that I'll call out is that there appears to be a little bit of a bug with kind of the UI of the dashboard here. So let's say I'm clicking around and I select February again, and then say I click on continent. The selections disappear here. And while this isn't a huge deal, it did take me a few minutes to kind of figure out if I right click, the options come back. Right. So might be worth looking into, is there something with the layer order or how the selection pane is organized within Power BI that, is leading to that kind of a behavior. But again, overall, Gerard, awesome job, really thorough. Really liked what you did here. Great job.
I'm very happy to walk through Javklan's work. He built a really, really robust, I'm going to call it an app for the purpose of this walkthrough. I really like it, but I want to start from the top and reiterate some of the stuff that Chris already mentioned about how it's so important to use the communication skills and this about the project section. We saw some of the work earlier. Some folks didn't really utilize it, and there is so much opportunity here. One of the very unique things that Javklan did is he actually made his dashboard serve 2 purposes. I'm going to come back to that a little bit later, but this is the first thing that he calls out in the About section. He also does a very, very purposeful color usage here. But he explains it in very much detail in his About section, what it is that you can do with his app. Moving from there, there's actually quite a bit of technical details here. I guess he's mentioning some of the most important details that he engineered. This piece of M code here, it's about giving the user the ability to filter down by individual month. We've seen this already in some of the other reports, instead of the just seasonality, which was given in the data set. So this is something that people had to dig in and reverse engineer to give us, the end users, the ability to filter down in a granular manner. Again, he's talking about some of the normalization that he's doing. One thing I will call out here, you couldn't really reverse engineer what he did, or at least not easily, from all of the details that he pasted here. And I'm not sure if that's on purpose or not, but we do get a glimpse into his process, showing off his technical work. One thing that did sort of come to mind, and I'm still not clear on that question, is if in light of creating something for an end user, it would be more useful to use this space to provide us with more explanation, or maybe like a walkthrough or how to use the particular dashboard. That being said, I'm still not clear on that. That being said, About To section is definitely a place where you should show off, among other things, your technical prowess. Finally, he talks a little bit about the design. He used PowerPoint. If you check above, he also used Excel and Power BI. So we are already at 3 different tools that he used to create this app, showing that he really put a lot of work into that. I'm not seeing any contact details or anything, but I would actually invite everybody to take a look at this. It's really quite cool. If you have some questions on how any of this was done, I'm sure that he'll be happy to get a reach out from you. I do like additional project images, and these are very well thought of. We have an image for each page in his app. Because this is an interactive report, it can happen for whatever reason that it fails. It won't load, it's lagging, you need some sort of permission to view it or something. So even if it fails, we as end users still have this ability to take a look at these pictures to judge if this is something that we want to use as a product to help us make an informed decision. Moving forward, I'm just going to go, and play with his app a little bit. So as I've said early on, there are actually 2 functionalities here, which is really cool. I don't think I saw anybody explicitly build it like this. So we have an option to compare our choice and try to find something similar to. So let's say that I went to Austria. I'm actually not much of a skier, but let's say I went to Austria and I really liked this Dachstein West ski place. And I'm going to try to actually open this in a full screen mode. Maybe it will help. And now I can, for example, select, let's say I want to see 3 very similar resorts to the one that I already visited. And this dashboard provides exactly that. So now I have this selection here, and I have 3 more most similar resorts that I can then, for example, if I hover over here, the drill through option will appear, and then I can click on discover, and it takes me to this whole new page where I can see a bunch of details of resorts. I think this is really cool. I don't remember seeing anybody else building it as explicitly as this. I think there's a lot of value there. I'm going to move back for a second. And we are going to test out the Discover New feature, which essentially assumes, I'm going to reset this filter, which essentially assumes that you've never been anywhere and you want to start from scratch. And this is a very well thought of layout. It's very minimalistic, which I like. You have the filters on the left-hand side. Let's say I want to go to Europe, to Austria. Let's say I want snow parks, I want child friendly, and I'm going to come back to the calendar a little bit later. Essentially what it does, it's filtering down the resorts to that match my criteria. Couple of things actually that I want to call out here, probably something that I'm going to offer constructive criticism is that now that I've selected the geography and all of these other features, I think that this space on the right here could be put to better use instead of just repeating my selection of Europe and Austria. That's quite a bit of real estate there, and there are so many other things that I think could be added instead of repeating that choice. Another thing is I'm not a skier, so I have no previous knowledge. And some of these elements here, I can assume that 46 euro is the day pass. But not being a skier, it doesn't have to necessarily be intuitive to me. Similar story with this 2.17K and 1.03K. Again, I have to assume that these are some sort of height differences or something, but I think that more could be done to sort of bring attention to that or explain it a little bit better. And finally, I did find what I think is a little bit of a bug. Overall, I really think this is an awesome work, and that's why I'm going so deep into trying to find these little nooks and crannies. If I select a month here, all of these snow coverage numbers go back to zero, except for the month in question. But if I leave that filter alone and just select the month from here, then everything works. I'm not sure what could be the call. I wanted to call out something for Jacqueline to maybe pay attention to if he wants to upgrade this a little bit more. But overall, I really like this report. There's even some details here. If you hover over the dots, the size of the dots is actually powered by prices. So the bigger the dot, the more expensive the resort. Again, really cool, really minimalistic, polished report, really easy to use, quick and snappy. My vote, definitely.
So we have one final entrant, or one final finalist, as Enrique would say. Very strong entry here. There is a lot to love. And I'm loving this portfolio submission format, just getting a little bit of extra context about how our analysts and developers are thinking about building their, dashboards and visualizations. Gives me that extra context to really understand, how you were thinking about this and why you built the app that you built. And similar to Stefano, Ben mentions that he was thinking along the same lines as resort and holiday websites. And so we end up with this really nice application view that is similar to what we see. And so that frame of thinking really informs a lot of the decisions that Ben made. And I think it's really smart to base, a similar travel application in Power BI, that UX off of very commonly used travel websites. Most people that would be using an app like this have probably used a travel website in the past. So aligning the UX to something your users are going to be familiar with is a really clever idea. We also get some really good context about some of the transformations and changes to the data that Ben made here. And by pinpointing these, it just makes it so much clearer some of the quality and depth of the work. So similar to Stefano, we end up with multiple currencies. We also seen this, season to month conversion. That was a really nice piece as well. And probably my favorite, which is, added on here, I think after Power BI updated something, he ended up using converting this snow coverage metric from the percentage into a star rating, which I think is really clever. And he mentioned some of his intention here, but that snow cover metric is extremely granular. It's a percentage of snow coverage. It's a little bit hard to wrap our head around. So he just took that and decided to simplify that into a 4-star rating, which I think for most users, is the snow coverage bad, good, really good is probably a very good start to exploring this data. So with that covered, let's go ahead and take a look at this app. And so unfortunately, we're not able to interact with this through the portfolio, but I think that we can really get a really good gist of how this application works just through the 2 screenshots that were provided. And we've seen a lot of these features before, but we start out with a nice filter pane here at the top. And then one of the things that Ben mentions in his write-up is that instead of adding sortability within the table itself, he created specific buttons to once again align with the UI that's more common on travel websites. But once we selected our range of filters, we end up with a very nice table that gets populated, and clicking into individual resorts within this table will pull up a resort-specific view. So this is, again, like exactly how we would navigate through a travel website. Enter a few parameters, get a list back, and then we can click into them and identify which one's really our favorite. And I think a few nice touches in this table here. Tables can be beautiful too if we put a little bit of elbow grease into them, but we get these flags for each country represented, which is going to be really helpful in a continent like Europe, where you're looking at the Alps and there are 5 or 6 countries. So having these flags is a really nice visual cue. We also get nice looking icons for some of the important snow park features. And additionally, I think, again, this snow rating, which is derived from snow coverage, I think is a really clever way to handle that. A lot of the applications we saw had just a, heat map of global snow coverage, which is an interesting visual. But I think when it comes to, selecting a resort, it can be really challenging to use a map like that to drill into the resort that you want. And so I think this way of incorporating it just gives me like a very good sense of someone looking for ski. Where's the best snow? Is the price good? Does it have a snow park? Let's go. One piece of feedback on this front end that it's relatively minor, but I think it's worth addressing is the one thing that threw me on this UI was if you look in the bottom left, there is the currency conversion piece, which is a great feature. So if I were to select the United States, the prices would show up in US dollars. UK would be British pounds. But when I first saw this, just because you're asking me, where do I think I'm sloping off to? And the first thing I see is a country. I see France. I think this is going to be the destination selector here. And, because the context is related to price, I think moving this drop down up near that price slicer would make it a more intuitive user experience. And that also starts to, raise the question, okay, now we have a third of our visual layout dedicated to this large title here. If we remove the interactive piece on the left, do we now have more ability to show this table a little bit more detail? Is there additional information we can add? Or even just rendering these very long German ski resort names in full, as opposed to truncating them? It's an option that we have if we, are able to get back some of this real estate here. So that's the biggest piece of feedback I have on this application. But in terms of functionality, there's a lot to love here. And then taking a look at the resort specific card. So if you had gone to that list of resorts, clicked a resort that you wanted, we end up with a really nice report card here. And similar to a lot of the other applications we've seen, we get some really nice icon-based views of our features. We get some of the key statistics. But my favorite piece here is definitely this calendar on the right. I love this visualization here. Like a lot of the other projects we've seen, he took those, long kind of, difficult to wrap our head around seasons, converted them to month, but we also get a nice visual indicator of when this resort is open, as well as bringing back that snow coverage piece to give us a sense for, are going to be good times, which times are risky, et cetera, to visit this resort. And finally, the auto-generated text on the left with the flag is a nice touch as well. I think that gives us a nice summary. I think if you were to really engineer this, we could maybe pull a description on the resorts or something. But overall, I think this is a really clever app layout. I think there's a lot to love in this application. One final nitpick is just because I can't interact with this. I think if there was interactivity, it'd probably be a little bit less noticeable. Is the map, we might consider starting this at a further out default zoom level. So when I open this page, I see a dot in the middle of mountains. And so particularly because the price here is in euros, if I'm a European visiting the United States, I'm interested in looking at this resort, I might want a little bit more geographical context. So just starting that default zoom at a further out level might give me that. But that's super minor. Overall, this is an awesome application. I love the way you thought about this problem. And there's some really clever ideas in here. So great job, Ben.
That is all the finalists. Now we just have the final exercise of selecting a winner from these finalists. Now, I know there's a lot of good stuff here, but does anyone maybe feel that some of these stands a bit above the rest?
Yeah. Having just gone through Ben's and seeing Chris's walkthrough of Stefano's, I'm a little bit torn because I think they both have this similar website UX design, but I think there's a little bit more polish in Stefano's, particularly with those auto-generated ski maps and that really nice resort-specific application interface. It's just outstanding. So I would be a little partial to Stefano personally.
I was actually going to have this very similar feedback to you, Chris. Is like Stefano's to me, like, kind of continues to stand out. Like I was just kind of poking around some of the other dashboards, and again, like just the like that website style kind of layout and format, the intuitiveness, interactivity, and things like that. It's like integrating exchange rate APIs into a dashboard to have current currency rates for whatever your selected currency. Like that's like brilliant. Like that's not something else that I necessarily saw, at least updating live, from an API and other people's dashboards. So I think there's features, attention to detail, kind of fit and finish and polish pieces in there that make Stefan's submission just A++.
I would agree. Just to second that too. I'm biased because I presented his work, but I've seen a lot of submissions that are really strong on the back end, but maybe a bit clunky on the front end, or really polished, great design, but a little bit less sophisticated in the back end. I think his example is really a perfect use case for combining both the front end and back end skills, and really, again, going above and beyond with integrating a lot of clever tools and techniques in his project. So he's getting my vote too.
Yeah, I'm beginning to think that he's going to clear this one. I cannot shake the feeling that this is probably one of the most difficult batches that we had, at least recently. And Stefano went first, and yet still at the end, I cannot stop thinking about Chris's presentation over and over and over again, and how amazing everything was. And that's not so he's not the only one amazing out there, and then the rest is trash. But we had 6 really, really, really high-end entries, and yet Stefano's is the only thing I keep thinking about. So yeah, I actually know that I'm going to vote for him. Don't not cut this out.
Stacey, any thoughts?
I'm trying to think.
Yeah, I think I have great respect for what Stefano created. But what I keep thinking about is what Brian presented about Jacqueline's approach to actually using your existing context of what you might have known about skiing to simplify that process of selecting another one. And I'm not a big skier. I haven't been in a lot of locations, but if you had asked me, where would you go? Could it be similar to what we have here in Canada? I think that would really help me identify and narrow down, even though I'm not, an avid skier. So I thought that was a really effective approach that would be really user-friendly, even for people who ski a lot or don't ski a lot.
Yeah, I had that same thought, especially some of the things that I look out for in these challenges are like things that people do that only they do, if that makes sense. And I think we've seen very different we've seen different approaches to tackling the same problems in a lot of these entries that we kind of presented. But that was one thing that stood out that was not only very clever, but that no one else really thought to do. And Bronislav, I hadn't even noticed that you could drill through based on that filtered list of related resorts and actually go to discover that new resort based on that on the other page that he created, which I thought was really, really clever. Chris Brule, you also kind of sold me on Ben's a little bit. I thought, and I love it because it was really just the 2 screenshots that he shared, but his design was so, well thought out that that's really all you need to kind of get the feel for the app.
I thought Ben's coverage or Ben's handling of snow coverage was far and away the best treatment or the best integration of that part of the analysis out of anyone, which that's one of the great things about this challenge is you see each participant, each finalist brings something unique to the table. And I think there's some really clever approaches by every single one of the finalists we talked about. It really just comes down to like who is able to do it all the best, in aggregate, which is sometimes is tough when you have such high quality submissions.
So what I'm hearing so far is Stefano, Ben, and Jacqueline as
that way.
number 1, 2, and 3, and then we vote, or do we want to deliberate a little bit more?
I think maybe the only thing worth kind of revisiting, maybe on each of these 3 kind of drilled down finalists, are maybe their descriptions of their project as well. And not just, how their app or their dashboard works, but how they were able to explain kind of a little bit of additional context on their process for creating it. And maybe I'll just share my screen so we can kind of all see them at the same time. But this is Stefanos right here. We've got this great app, and then his about this project with the challenge, his approach, a little case study walkthrough, and then talking about the different data set Power BI challenges that he had. We've got Ben's right here. It's a little bit more condensed, maybe, and he kind of doesn't really show us what he did here. He just kind of walks through the different challenges in a summarized format and some of the UX. And then you've got Jacqueline, who provides a lot of technical context. Maybe it's not as organized as the rest. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts after seeing all these.
Yeah, actually, sorry, go ahead, Aaron.
So I was just going to say for Jacqueline's, so Enrique, if you go in and click into like the explore, the compare portion of the dashboard, like if you scroll up and then, compare your experience, and then just click select any resort. Doesn't necessarily, right? So like right now you're on Alta, right? Yep. So if you right click on Alta in the right hand list and then click drill through and then discover. Like I didn't realize this when we were going through it initially. Like one of the things that was missing for me from this dashboard was that context where it's like, okay, now I've found these other resorts, where they located. You can zoom out of that map too, so you have a little bit better like regional data. But again, it's like that ability, like this goes from like that kind of thought process, like, hey, I've skied at Breckenridge, or I've skied at Big Sty or Revelstoke, or, insert ski area here. And it's like, what compares to that kind of from price and overall ranking or rating. And then you can kind of go and drill through and explore each one of those mountains in a little bit more detail. Right. So it's like, I really like the kind of from like a discovery and kind of anchoring it from your experience so far standpoint. It's like, hey, here are the places that I've skied at. Like, how does this mountain compare to Stowe in Vermont? Right. Or how does this compare to Sunday River, where Chris is going next weekend? Like stuff like that it's super interesting. And it's a great way to tie in that UX and the individual user experience to exploring and finding different places to ski at or snowboard.
I was going to say about the about section. I actually like both Ben's and Stefano's more. Stefano's is far more structured, and the thing that we were chatting about yesterday. So I'm not sure if for this very specific use case, I probably like Ben's approach the most, because he gives like sort of how to use his app or his report dashboard, call it what you will, instead of using the space to showcase his technical prowess and maybe some conversation skills, even though it's a perfectly viable approach and the use case. I think from that that standpoint alone, I probably like Ben's the best.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think it raises a good point, which is that there's no right or wrong formula for writing a great description. And in one case, your priority might be about describing the UX, right? Providing clear instructions to the end user. I actually was thinking about it from a different perspective, reading Stefano's, which was, I want to understand how Stefano thinks, right? And how he approached the problem, how he tackled it, how he thought about the end user. And I think he really nailed it from that approach. Again, there's no right or wrong, but I felt like I in his shoes as he was building out this project, and I really appreciate how well he was able to bring that to life in his description.
Yeah, and I think, Chris, you mentioned it in the original review of Stefano's, how like as a hiring manager, like this really helps you kind of get a great sense of how Stefano is as an analyst. I think even for me, just as an analyst reading it allows me to learn a lot more from reading it in this format than in others. And it's obviously a very impressive report, but the fact that I can get a lot closer to being able to build it myself just by reading his description of his own project, I think speaks a lot to the quality of his about this project section as well. So, all right, it looks like we've got kind of these three finalists here. Do we maybe think Stefano vote 1, Ben 2, and Jacqueline 3?
Yeah.
All right. Is everyone ready? 1, 2, 3. All right. It looks like Stefano takes it 4-2. 2 votes going to Jacqueline. Well, congratulations, Stefano. Let's give him a round of applause.
Awesome job.
Awesome job.
Amazing
Beautiful
project.
Yeah. Some of the most impressive Power BI work I think I've ever seen, to be perfectly honest. That was really cool. And to go along with your victory, Stefano, and as a prize, you'll be taking home a free annual membership to Maven Analytics for yourself, and another one for you to give away to anyone that you'd like. So congratulations once again, and especially by winning the first challenge that's officially ever been run on our site. So that's it for this challenge. Thanks again to everyone that continues to participate. We've got a lot more in store from you guys as we continue to evolve these challenges. So stay tuned, and thank you.